They say you can tell the true character of a person by the way they treat you when you have nothing. But what about when you have everything, and they think it should all belong to them? For years, I worked my hands to the bone, built a life from nothing, and created a future I could be proud of. My wealth wasn't handed to me. Every penny had sweat, pain, and sacrifice behind it. I thought my son understood that. I thought he respected me. But as the years went by, I started noticing a change in him, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. It began with small comments. "Dad, you shouldn't stress about money anymore." Or, "You should let me handle your accounts." Harmless on the surface, but there was something underneath. Something that made me uneasy. And soon, the mask came off completely. He wasn't just offering to help. He was demanding control. He said I was too old to manage my own finances, too stubborn to see reason. He made me feel like a guest in my own life, as though I was just holding his future hostage by keeping what I had earned. But what he didn't know was that I wasn't as powerless as he believed. I wasn't going to let anyone, especially my own flesh and blood, treat me like I was incapable of running my own life. This is the story of how I turned the tables, how I showed my son that money can be transferred, accounts can be closed, and fortunes can be protected. But respect? That has to be earned. And I was about to teach him a lesson he'd never forget. My name is Daniel, and for most of my life, I never thought much about money. At least, not in the way most people do. To me, money wasn't about luxury or power. It was about survival, security, and giving my family a life better than the one I had growing up. I was born into a small, working-class family. My father was a mechanic who came home every night with grease-stained hands, and my mother worked part-time cleaning houses. We didn't have much, but they taught me something far more valuable than money: the meaning of hard work and integrity. When other kids got shiny new toys for Christmas, I got hand-me-downs and a reminder that what we couldn't buy, we could build. Those early lessons shaped me, and by the time I turned 18, I was determined to build something of my own. I started with nothing but a beat-up truck and a willingness to work long hours. I worked construction during the day, did odd jobs at night, and spent weekends learning everything I could about saving and investing. It wasn't glamorous. My hands were rough, my back ached more often than not, and there were nights I went to bed wondering if it was all worth it. But slowly, it paid off. I saved enough to buy a small house, a run-down fixer-upper that I renovated myself. I still remember the smell of sawdust in the air, the paint under my nails, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing this house was mine. It became the place where I would raise my son, Jeremy. When Jeremy was born, I felt like the richest man alive. Holding him in my arms, I promised him that no matter what happened, I'd make sure he had opportunities I never did. That promise became the driving force of my life. Every early morning, every late night, every financial risk I took, everything was for him. Raising him wasn't always easy. Money was still tight for years, but I made it work. I gave up vacations, fancy clothes, and nights out. I built my business slowly. First small renovation projects, then flipping houses, and eventually managing rental properties. By the time Jeremy was a teenager, I had built a small fortune. Not enough to make headlines, but enough to guarantee a comfortable life and a secure future. But more than the money, I wanted to pass down my values. I taught Jeremy how to change a tire, how to fix a leaky faucet, how to save more than he spent. I told him stories about scraping by when I was young, about making sacrifices and working hard. Sometimes he listened, sometimes he rolled his eyes. I chalked it up to teenage rebellion. Our house was modest but warm. The kitchen table was old and scarred, but it had seen countless family dinners, homework sessions, and late-night conversations. The backyard was where we grilled burgers in the summer and played catch when Jeremy was little. I thought those moments meant something, but as Jeremy got older, things started to shift. He went to college, got a good job, and moved into a sleek apartment in the city. He was proud of how modern his life was compared to the way I lived. When he came to visit, he'd make little jokes about my frugal habits, about the way I clipped coupons, the way I drove my old truck even though I could afford a new one, the way I kept meticulous records of every expense. I laughed it off at first. After all, he was young, ambitious, and wanted to make his mark on the world. But a part of me worried that he didn't understand where all this came from. The years of sacrifice, the choices I had to make, the nights I lay awake wondering how I'd pay the mortgage. Still, I stayed proud of him. Proud that he had ambition. Proud that he was building a life of his own. I told myself that one day he would appreciate everything I'd done. One day he'd see that the security and comfort he enjoyed didn't just appear out of thin air. It was earned inch by inch through sweat and sacrifice. As for me, I was starting to think about slowing down. My body didn't have the same strength it once did. My hands, once steady, now ached after a long day of work. I still managed my investments, kept my properties in good shape, and made sure my retirement accounts were solid. I took pride in knowing that even if I stopped working tomorrow, I'd be okay. But life has a way of throwing you curveballs. It was around this time, when I was beginning to think about my future, that I started to notice Jeremy's attitude changing even more. He didn't just tease me about my habits anymore. He started telling me outright that I was stuck in the past, that I didn't understand how the world works now. At first, I thought it was just a phase. Maybe he was just stressed, or maybe he wanted to feel more in control of his own life. But slowly, I began to see the truth. This wasn't about helping me. It was about controlling me. And that's where this story really begins. The first time Jeremy brought it up, it seemed innocent enough. We were sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee on a quiet Sunday morning. He looked around the house, at the faded wallpaper and the old wooden cabinets, and said, "Dad, you should let me handle things now. You've worked hard enough. Why don't you start enjoying life? A little?" I smiled, appreciating the sentiment. "I am enjoying life," I said. "And I still like keeping track of my own finances. It keeps me sharp." Jeremy laughed, but there was a tightness to it. "Come on, Dad. You don't need to stress yourself with all that paperwork anymore. You should be relaxing, traveling, maybe buying yourself something nice for once." It was meant to sound caring, but something about the way he said it made me pause. I brushed it off that day, but the topic kept coming back, more often and more forcefully. A few weeks later, he brought documents. Real documents. "I had a lawyer draw these up," he said one evening, laying the papers on my kitchen table. "They'll transfer the assets into my name so I can manage them for you. You won't have to worry about anything anymore." I stared at the stack of papers, my heart sinking. This wasn't just a suggestion anymore. This was a plan, his plan, for my life, my money, my future. "Jeremy," I said carefully, "I'm not signing anything. I appreciate that you want to help, but I can manage just fine." He frowned, clearly irritated. "Dad, you're not getting any younger. You could forget to pay a bill, get scammed, lose everything you worked for. I'm just trying to protect you." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. Forget to pay a bill? Lose everything? I had built this entire life from scratch, survived recessions, kept food on the table even when money was tight, and now my own son was talking to me like I was incompetent. "I'm not helpless, Jeremy," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I know exactly what I'm doing." But instead of easing the tension, that only seemed to make him more determined. Over the next few months, the pressure increased. He called me almost daily, asking if I'd changed my mind. He brought up horror stories about elderly people losing their savings to scams, about medical emergencies draining bank accounts, about property disputes. "You have to think ahead, Dad," he said one night. "What if something happens to you tomorrow? What if you can't make decisions anymore? Then what? Everything could get tied up in probate. The government could take a huge cut. Why risk it when we can secure everything now?" At first, I stayed patient. I told myself he was just worried about me, just being a responsible son. But deep down, I could feel the shift in his tone. This wasn't about protecting me anymore. This was about control. The turning point came during a family dinner. We were sitting with a few relatives when Jeremy made a joke, except it didn't feel like a joke. "You know, Dad's got all this money tied up in old-school investments," he said, laughing. "One of these days, I'm going to take over and bring him into the 21st century." The table chuckled politely, but I could see the look in his eyes. He meant it. After dinner, I confronted him outside. "That wasn't funny, Jeremy," I said. He shrugged. "I was just joking." "No, you weren't. You're treating me like I'm some kind of burden, like I can't handle my own life." His expression hardened. "Because you can't, Dad. You're being stubborn. You're putting everything at risk just because you can't admit you're getting older. Why can't you just trust me?" The words hit like a punch. Trust. I had trusted him with everything: his education, his future, my sacrifices, and now he was accusing me of not trusting him? But as much as it hurt, it also gave me clarity. This wasn't just a disagreement. This was a battle for control over everything I had built. That night, after Jeremy left, I sat in the quiet of my kitchen and thought about what to do. I could give in, sign the papers, let him manage everything. It would probably make things easier, at least on the surface. But I knew what that would mean. I'd no longer have control over my own life, and I couldn't do that. Not because of pride, not because I didn't love my son, but because giving in would mean betraying the very principles that had built everything we had. I stayed up late that night, going through my accounts, reviewing my investments, checking every last detail of my financial plan. If Jeremy wanted control, he was going to find out just how careful and thorough I could be. I realized then that this wasn't just about money. It was about respect. And I was about to teach my son a very painful, very necessary lesson about what it means to truly earn it. From that night on, I felt a shift in the air. Jeremy wasn't just casually bringing it up anymore. He was relentless. Every visit, every phone call, every message seemed to circle back to the same subject. My money, my assets, my future. "Dad, have you thought about the transfer yet?" "Dad, this is really for your own good." "Dad, I don't want you to end up broke or scammed." Each time he said it, a little more of my patience chipped away. I had always prided myself on being a calm man. I wasn't quick to anger, but I could feel a tightness building in my chest every time he spoke to me, like I was fragile, like I was incapable of making rational choices. I started to notice other changes too. Jeremy didn't visit just to check on me anymore. He didn't ask how I was doing, what I was reading, what projects I was working on. Every conversation felt like a transaction, like he was only interested in one thing: the fortune I had spent my life building. One night, after another tense phone call, I sat in my living room staring at the old family photo hanging on the wall. It was a picture of the three of us, me, Jeremy, and his mother, taken when Jeremy was just a boy. His smile in that picture was so pure, so full of trust. It hurt to think about how far we'd drifted from that moment. I wasn't angry at him. Not entirely. I understood where some of his fear came from. He had grown up watching me work until my hands bled. Maybe he thought he was protecting me. Maybe he thought he was saving me from myself. But good intentions don't excuse disrespect, and his tone had crossed a line. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to argue with him anymore. I wasn't going to defend myself or try to prove that I was still capable. Instead, I would quietly take back control of the situation. The next morning, I got to work. I called my financial advisor and explained what I wanted: diversification, new accounts, maximum privacy. I shifted my savings into multiple secure investments, set up trusts with specific conditions, and tightened every legal safeguard I could. I wanted to make sure that no one, not even my own son, could touch my assets without my permission. The process wasn't easy. There were meetings, signatures, long hours spent reviewing documents late into the night. But with every step, I felt a little stronger, a little more certain that I was doing the right thing. And yet, the emotional weight was heavy. This wasn't just about numbers on a page. This was about my relationship with my son. Every time I moved another account, I felt a pang of sadness. I wasn't just protecting my wealth. I was protecting myself from him. Jeremy, of course, had no idea what I was doing. He kept pushing, thinking I was still stalling out of stubbornness. His calls became shorter, sharper. "Dad, why are you being so difficult? You're making this harder than it needs to be." I bit back the urge to snap at him. "I'm not ready to make any decisions right now," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Not ready?" he scoffed. "This isn't something you can just put off forever. You have to think about the future. About my future." Those last words cut deep. My future, my legacy, my life's work. And he was talking about it as though it already belonged to him. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark, staring out the window at the quiet street, my mind racing. Was I being too harsh? Was I overreacting? Maybe Jeremy really did think he was doing the right thing. But then I remembered the look on his face at dinner, the way he had laughed about taking over as if it were just a matter of time. No, this wasn't just about concern. This was about control. And that's when something hardened in me. I wasn't just protecting my money anymore. I was protecting my dignity. By the end of that week, I had completed my financial plan. Every asset was safe, every account protected. I even left detailed instructions with my lawyer about what should happen if anything happened to me. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. I was ready. But Jeremy wasn't finished. Pushing. And the real storm was still coming. A few days after I had secured everything, Jeremy showed up unannounced. I could tell from the moment he walked in that something was different. His jaw was set, his tone sharper than usual. "Dad, we need to talk," he said, not even bothering with a hello. I gestured to the table. "All right. Sit down." He didn't sit. Instead, he dropped a thick envelope in front of me. Inside were more documents, this time notarized, pre-filled, ready for my signature. "This is the last time I'm asking nicely," he said. "Sign these. Today." I felt my stomach twist. It wasn't just the demand. It was the way he said it, like he was talking to a child who had disobeyed too many times. "Jeremy," I said slowly, "you're talking to me like I don't have a choice." "But I do." "You don't have a choice," he snapped. "You're gambling with everything." "You've had your time, Dad. It's my turn now." There it was, the quiet, unspoken thought, finally spoken out loud. "It's my turn now." I stayed silent for a long moment, my hands resting on the envelope. "You really think everything I built is just waiting for you to take over?" I asked softly. His face flushed. "I'm trying to protect you. You don't see it, but you're vulnerable. People will take advantage of you if you don't let me step in." The words stung because they carried a kernel of truth. Yes, I was older. Yes, mistakes happen. But what hurt more was the assumption that I was already incapable, that I had become a liability in my own life. "You're talking about me like I'm already gone," I said. Jeremy looked away, and for a moment I saw a flicker of guilt in his expression. But it was gone as quickly as it came. "This is the smart thing to do," he said. "You can't fight me on this forever." I stood up, slowly, deliberately, letting the silence hang in the air. "You're right," I said, finally. "I can't fight you forever, but I won't sign those papers." Jeremy's hands clenched at his sides. "So that's it? You're just going to sit here until everything falls apart?" "No," I said quietly. "I'm going to make sure everything doesn't fall apart." He stormed out without another word, slamming the door behind him. When the house went quiet again, I sank into my chair, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. I wasn't just fighting with my son, I was watching the bond between us splinter, piece by piece. The next few weeks were tense. Jeremy stopped calling. The silence was deafening, but in some ways, it was a relief. At least I wasn't being pressured every day. Still, there were moments late at night when I stared at my phone, wondering if I should call him first, wondering if I was making a mistake. This was my only son. What if this decision drove him away for good? But every time the doubt crept in, I reminded myself of what was at stake. If I gave in now, I would lose more than just my money. I would lose my independence, my dignity, and the very principles that had defined my life. One evening, I found myself in my workshop, sanding a piece of wood for a small table I had been building. The rhythmic sound of the sandpaper was soothing, steady, grounding. It reminded me of who I was, a builder, a problem solver, a man who had never needed to be rescued. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about protecting my fortune. This was about teaching my son a lesson he clearly hadn't learned. Yet, Jeremy needed to understand that respect isn't automatic. It isn't something you inherit like money. It's something you earn. By the time I finished that table, I knew what I had to do. I would wait. I would let him come back to me. And when he did, I would show him exactly what I had done to protect myself, and why. I didn't want to humiliate him. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted him to see me for who I truly was. Not as a stubborn, old man standing in the way of his future, but as the father who had given him everything and was still strong enough to stand his ground. And deep down, I hoped that maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment he finally learned to respect me, not just as his father, but as a man. Weeks passed before Jeremy finally showed up again. The air between us had been thick with silence, and part of me wondered if he would ever come back. But one Saturday morning, I heard his car pull up. When I opened the door, he was standing there with the same determined look he'd worn the last time we spoke. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded and led him into the kitchen. This time, I was ready. We sat across from each other, the same table where I'd taught him to do his math homework years ago, where we'd shared meals and laughter when life was simpler. But today, there was no laughter, just the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. "Dad, I can't keep doing this," Jeremy said, breaking the silence. "You're being unreasonable. You're putting me in an impossible position. You know that. One day, this will all fall on me. Why are you making it so hard to prepare for that?" I looked at him carefully, choosing my words with precision. "You think this is about preparation?" I said. "But it's not. This is about control." He frowned. "Control? I'm trying to help you." I leaned forward. "Are you? Or are you trying to make sure you get everything exactly the way you want it? You don't call to see how I'm doing anymore. You don't come by unless it's to talk about paperwork. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being your father and became just a set of numbers you want to manage." Jeremy flinched, but said nothing. I reached for the folder I had placed on the table earlier. Inside was a complete record of everything I had done in the past month. New accounts, new trusts, new investments. I slid it toward him. "What's this?" he asked. "My plan," I said simply. He flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from confusion to shock. "You moved everything?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Every account, every investment, every property, secured, diversified, and legally protected. If anything happens to me, everything is already accounted for." Jeremy slammed the folder shut. "Why would you do this without telling me?" "Because you stopped asking," I said quietly. "You stopped listening. All you cared about was getting your hands on it as soon as possible. So I made sure that no one, not even you, could misuse it." He looked at me, anger flashing in his eyes. "So that's it? You don't trust me?" I held his gaze. "Jeremy, trust is earned. And lately, you haven't been acting like someone who's earned it." He started to speak, then stopped, the words catching in his throat. For the first time in months, he looked less like a man trying to win an argument and more like the boy I had raised. Confused, hurt, struggling to understand. "I thought I was helping," he said finally, his voice softer. "I didn't want you to get taken advantage of. I didn't want to lose you, or what you've built, because of some mistake." I sighed. "I know you thought you were helping, and I appreciate that. But there's a difference between helping someone and trying to control them. You wanted me to hand everything over because it made you feel safer. But Jeremy, that's not how this works. My life's work isn't just numbers in an account. It's the years I spent building something out of nothing. And I'm not going to give that up just to make you feel in charge." For a long moment, the room was silent. Then Jeremy's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. "So what happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now," I said, "we move forward on my terms. The trusts I've set up will protect this family for generations, if we treat it with respect. And when the time comes for you to inherit, you'll receive it. But until then, I remain in control. That's the lesson I need you to learn. Money can be transferred, but respect has to be earned." Jeremy looked down at the folder again, running his hand over the cover. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might storm out again. But then he nodded, just once, and stood up. "I need time to think," he said. "Take all the time you need," I replied. When the door closed behind him, I felt a rush of conflicting emotions: relief, sadness, pride, even grief. This had been the hardest conversation I'd ever had with my son, but it was necessary. As I sat there in the quiet kitchen, I realized this was the turning point, not just in our relationship, but in my life. I had reclaimed my independence, my dignity, and my peace of mind. Whatever happened next, I knew I had done the right thing. The house felt heavier after Jeremy left, like the air had been pulled tight and was waiting to snap. For days, there was no word from him. No calls, no texts, nothing but silence. At first, I told myself it was good. He needed time to think, to process what I'd told him. But as the days turned into a week, then two, a gnawing sense of unease began to creep in. I missed him. I missed hearing his voice, even if it was just to argue with me. Then one night, close to midnight, I heard a car pull into the driveway. When I opened the door, Jeremy was standing there, looking tired, his hair a mess, his eyes rimmed red, not from anger this time, but from exhaustion. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I nodded and stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table again, the same spot where so much had been said and left unsaid between us. But this time, Jeremy wasn't holding papers. He wasn't pushing me to sign anything. Instead, he just sat there, staring at his hands for a long time before finally speaking. "I was angry," he said, his voice rough. "Angry that you didn't trust me. Angry that you made all those changes behind my back. But mostly angry because you were right." I stayed silent, letting him talk. "I've been thinking a lot these past few weeks," he continued. "About Mom, about when I was a kid, about how much you gave up so I could have a chance in life. And I realized something. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as my dad and started seeing you as a stepping stone. Like the next stage of my life was just waiting for you to hand me the keys. And that was wrong." He looked up at me then, his eyes wet, but steady. I was so focused on controlling the future that I forgot to respect the present. Respect you. His words hit me harder than any argument we'd had. For weeks, I had braced myself for another fight, another round of accusations. But here he was, sitting in front of me, not demanding anything, not angry, just vulnerable. "I thought I was protecting you," he said, "but maybe I was just protecting myself, protecting my own fear of losing you someday. If I could control everything, maybe it wouldn't feel so scary." I let out a slow breath, my chest loosening, for the first time in weeks. "Jeremy," I said gently, "I don't blame you for being scared, but control doesn't stop loss. It just turns love into a transaction. And that's not what family is about." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The house was quiet, except for the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. Then Jeremy did something that caught me completely off guard. He reached across the table and took my hand. "I don't want to lose you, Dad," he said softly. "And I don't want to lose us. Can we start over?" I felt my throat tighten. I had been ready to fight, ready to stand my ground no matter the cost. But this wasn't a battle anymore. This was a son asking for a chance to rebuild what we'd nearly destroyed. I nodded. "Yes," I said, "we can start over. But it has to be different this time. No more power plays, no more pressure, just honesty and respect. Both ways." Jeremy nodded back, relief washing over his face. "I can do that," he said. "I want to do that." In that moment, something shifted between us. The tension that had hung in the air for months began to dissolve. The confrontation wasn't over yet, not completely, but for the first time, I felt hope that maybe, just maybe, we could come out of this stronger than before. The next morning, Jeremy showed up again, this time in daylight, without the heaviness of midnight confession hanging over us. He looked different, calmer, as if he'd spent the night making a decision. "I was thinking," he said, sitting at the table with me, "I don't just want to talk about changing, I want to show you." I raised an eyebrow. "Show me?" He nodded. "I called my lawyer this morning. I told him to tear up all the documents I had prepared. I don't want to take control of your accounts anymore. Not now. Not ever. Not until you decide it's time. I realize now that trying to force your hand was never going to work. All it did was hurt us both." For a moment, I just stared at him, letting the weight of his words sink in. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Not just for him to back down, but for him to understand. "Jeremy," I said slowly, "you have no idea how much that means to me." He smiled faintly, a little sheepish. "I think I do now." We sat there for a while, just talking, really talking, for the first time in months. He asked me questions about my investments, not because he wanted to control them, but because he wanted to learn. And I told him things I hadn't shared before. How I chose certain properties, how I navigated risks, how I built everything step by step. For years, I had been afraid that if I let him too close, he would just try to take over. But now, for the first time, I felt like we could have a partnership, not one built on power struggles, but on respect. Later that afternoon, we drove out to one of my rental properties together. Jeremy walked through the hallways with me, listening carefully as I explained what repairs I planned to make next. "This is the first time I've really seen all this," he admitted. "I knew you worked hard, but I don't think I ever understood how much thought you put into every decision." "That's because you were only looking at the end result," I said gently. "But wealth isn't just a number in a bank account. Jeremy, it's built piece by piece over time. It's as much about patience and discipline as it is about money." He nodded thoughtfully, and I could see something shifting in him, a respect that hadn't been there before. By the time we got back to the house, the tension that had once felt suffocating between us was gone. It wasn't that everything was magically fixed. We still had more conversations ahead, more trust to rebuild. But this was a start. Before he left that evening, Jeremy paused at the door. "Dad," he said, "thank you, not just for protecting what you built, but for not giving up on me, even when I didn't deserve it." I felt a lump rise in my throat. "You'll always be my son," I said. "I'll fight for what's right, but I'll never stop believing in you." He smiled, and for the first time in months, it wasn't strained. It was the smile I remembered from when he was a boy. As I watched him drive away, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. This fight hadn't been about winning or losing. It had been about teaching my son the value of respect, independence, and patience. And finally, it felt like the lesson had landed. The weeks that followed were different, quieter. Not because Jeremy stayed away. In fact, he started visiting more often. But because the tension that had hung over every conversation was finally gone. For the first time in months, we talked about things other than money. He'd ask me about my day, about the books I was reading, about the projects I had going on in the workshop. Slowly, I saw my son coming back. Not the man who had tried to control my life, but the boy who used to sit with me on the porch, asking endless questions about how the world worked. And I welcomed it. I started including him in small decisions, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I'm thinking about putting some money into a new property, I'd tell him, and instead of demanding control, he'd ask, "What made you pick that one?" He wasn't looking for leverage anymore. He was looking for knowledge. One afternoon, we went through my records together. I showed him the trusts I'd set up, the protections I'd put in place. This time, instead of frustration, I saw admiration in his eyes. "You really thought of everything," he said. "I had to," I replied. "Not just to protect myself, but to protect you too. If I'd handed you everything before you were ready, it wouldn't have helped you. It would have hurt you." Jeremy nodded slowly, understanding. "I think I get it now," he said. "You weren't just saying no to me. You were teaching me that there's a right way and a wrong way to handle what you've built." "That's exactly it," I said. "Wealth without wisdom is a burden, not a blessing." We sat there for a while in comfortable silence, and I felt something shift inside me. The anger I'd been carrying for months, the frustration, the hurt, it was gone. In its place was something steadier. Pride, relief, even gratitude. Because, as hard as this chapter had been, it had forced us to face something we'd been avoiding for years. The reality that one day my time would run out. And when that day came, I wanted Jeremy to be ready. Not just financially, but emotionally. I wanted him to be the kind of man who could handle not just money, but responsibility. The kind of man who could stand on his own 2 feet and make decisions not out of fear or greed, but out of respect for the life we had built together. And for the first time, I believed he could be that man. One evening, we sat on the back porch together, watching the sun sink low over the horizon. Jeremy was quiet for a long time before finally speaking. "You know," he said, "I think I was scared of losing you before I even really had to. I thought, if I could control everything, maybe I could stop time. But I see now that all I was doing was pushing you away faster." I put a hand on his shoulder. "You can't stop time, son, but you can make the time we have count. And that's worth more than anything I could ever leave you in a will." He nodded, and I could see the tears in his eyes. "I don't care about the money anymore," he said. "I just don't want to lose this. Us. You won't," I promised. In that moment, I realized something important. This story was never about money. It was about respect, his for me and mine for him. It was about standing firm when it mattered, even when it hurt. Because sometimes love means saying no. And as I looked out over the yard I had worked so hard to maintain, I felt a deep, unshakable peace. I had done what I set out to do. I had protected my life's work. But more importantly, I had protected the bond between father and son. I may not have changed the world, but I had changed my world. And that was enough. If you've stayed with me until the end of this story, then you know this was never just about money. It was about dignity, respect, and the courage to stand up for yourself, even when it means having the hardest conversation of your life with someone you love. I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to take control of your life, your decisions, your money, or even your future, because they thought they knew better? How did you handle it? Did you give in to keep the peace, or did you stand your ground like I did? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire someone else going through the same thing right now. And if this story struck a chord with you, Don't leave without doing 3 quick things. Hit the like button. It lets me know you want more powerful stories like this. Subscribe to the channel, because I post stories every week about family, betrayal, redemption, and life lessons that hit close to home. Turn on notifications so you never miss when the next story drops. I've got some coming up that will make you think even deeper about relationships, trust, and forgiveness. Finally, if you know someone who might need to hear this message, maybe a friend who's going through a tough family situation or struggling with boundaries, share this video with them. You never know whose life you might help change just by passing along a story. At the end of the day, this isn't just my story. It's a lesson for all of us. Money can be protected, but respect has to be earned.